now. So hi and welcome to this webinar. My name is Jabbar Lubaidi. I'm professor of media studies and communication technologies, also the academic director of global programs of the Munich Institute for Global Engagement. This event came really as, or is based on initiative from our academic affairs division, and in particularly by the idea came from our provost, Dr. Karim Ismaili. And so we jumped in and probably take the lead. This is the first, I think, event related to the theme of democratic process and engagement and elections. And of course, this is good for us because I don't know about you. I know we are surrounded by so many things, starting from COVID-19 and its consequences, health issues, really public crisis in so many dimensions. But something that's important always, we keep in mind that every 4 years, we have this very important day in November 3rd to have the elections. And of course, around the elections comes a lot of questions, and not necessarily the media will be able or always able to answer these questions. Sometimes really media muddy, our cloud, our understanding of the elections and what election means to us as American citizen, and in that sense for all of the world. So the Munich Institute for Global Engagement with this call, and we were supported so generously by our co-sponsor, that's the Martin Richard Institute for Social Justice, and also from our students by the Jewish Muslim coalitions. These, the three of us, the global programs, the Munich Institute for Global Engagement, and all of us who work together. And so I want to thank Susan Williams for helping in publicity. Also, of course, really the great help we got from my colleague, Laura Mulvey, because she really worked hard on this, and she is co-hosting this event. Meanwhile, I want to thank all our participants that they came and joined us. We have about 28. I know the Canadian program, they have another event. So this is Bridgewater State University. It speaks to the quality of contributions to our audience on campus and off campus. But to really reach out to our speakers, I reached out to the Senator Mark Pacheco and the three professors you see, the Professor Shaheen Muzaffar and also Dr. Michael Krizanik and also Dr. Jason Edwards. So thank you for that. And I know the schedule very heavy for our provost, Dr. Karim Ismaili, but he generously responded to my request, and he is with us now. And I will give the floor to Dr. Karim Ismaili to give his opening thoughts. Dr. Ismaili.
Thank you so much, Jabbar. Jabbar, thank you so much for organizing this, and thank you everyone for attending. There are so many issues that we're facing in this country, and of course, in the midst of all this, we have a series of elections, including a presidential election. I really want to thank Senator Pacheco, Dr. Krasanik, Dr. Mozaffar. Hello, Shaheen, it's good to see you. And Dr. Edwards for taking the time to contribute to what we should be doing as a university, which was engaging in dialogue about public issues. So I want to thank you for your participation. I will note that yesterday, right here, I voted by mail. I wasn't worried about voting by mail, but as you know, this election, there are worries about our electoral process that have been shared. Voting is our sacred right. It's our sacred duty. it's very important for us to have confidence in the electoral process and to not worry about issues like voter suppression or voter fraud. This is it's a nation that has engaged in elections for many, many, many years, and those elections have been hard fought, but have ultimately not been discredited in terms of the election outcomes. And so we shouldn't worry about that right now. My worry is that, as I'm sure all of you are worried about, is that we want to make sure that people actually vote. And so I want to thank Dr. Mary Grant, who is here, I can see, and a cross-divisional group at the university that has been working hard to provide opportunities for the university community to engage issues around election and democratic participation. I think that those conversations have been great, and the fact that the community has stepped up, as Jabbar has done today, to create these forums is really important. I also would say that just before this call, we convened that group, and what we know is that people are going through significant and heightened levels of stress and anxiety related to many things, but most importantly, we're going through a global pandemic. We're going through a situation where people are feeling the stress of racial injustice, the stress of an electoral cycle. So what we want to do also as a community, and we will be doing this, is thinking about the well-being of our community as we continue to go through this. So why do elections matter? They matter because they generate outcomes that we all have to live with. And so we have a role. We can choose as part of who we want to vote for. And fundamentally, that's what this is about. So Jabbar, I want to thank you for convening this group. I want to thank our great speakers for taking the time to share your thoughts. But I also want to thank our community for continuing to do the best of what this university does, which is to engage these issues with thought and with depth. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Ismaili, for that. And I will, of course, add my thank you to support, surely, for Dr. Mary Grant and also for Dr. Munkai To, and my colleague, of course, Laura Mulvey. She is the program manager of Community Service Center at the Martin Richard Institute for Social Justice. This is a collective call, and as Dr. Ismaili referred to the importance of election, because it is a secretarial duty, a civic duty, and I think this is a great segue to our first speaker, Senator Mark Pacheco, who is actually on, his name is on the ballot, by the way, and I see this in front of me as because he's going for senator in Congress. And he will give his thoughts about, the importance of this day, the elections on November 3rd, and also what does it mean to have a participation in this celebration of democracy and democratic engagement for all of us, and especially for students and faculty and librarians or the campuses around Massachusetts. Senator Pacheco. And mute yourself, please. Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Well, first of all, let me thank you, Jabbar, and the leadership at Bridgewater State University for this type of engagement. I think it's important for the community and for the student body and the leadership at the university to engage and talk about something that very often I think we take for granted, and that's the essence of our very democracy that we have in the United States of America. And many people will look at this election as another election. But from my perspective, looking at it from the perspective of someone that has now been on the ballot just about every 2 years since 1979, believe it or not, as a school board member for 10 years, in running in 1988 for the House of Representatives and started serving there in 89 through 92. And then I have had the great fortune of serving in the Massachusetts Senate since 1993, January of that year. And so if I am successfully elected again this year, my name is on the ballot, then I will, and if God willing, I serve out my term in the state Senate, I will have served in the Massachusetts Senate for 30 years. So I bring to this discussion a little perspective of local, state, and national governance, because I have ran for federal office, and not successfully, but it was a challenge and opportunity that I certainly enjoyed doing and learned a lot throughout that process. But throughout my whole time in government, there has never been a time that compares to the moment we are in right now. Because this election, in my opinion, is very much about the future of democracy. We see authoritarianism moving forward rapidly in the way the federal government is being managed right now. When we look at what happens in many other governments that we would see as authoritarian or dictatorships, we are, starting to head in that direction, in my opinion. So this election, to me, is very much about maintaining our democracy. I am a proud Democrat and have been working and supporting Joe Biden in this campaign, and hoping that he will be successful on November 3rd, so we can bring back some normalcy to the federal government and also to our partners all around the globe. And I know that there are members of both the faculty and the student body here today that care very much about our interactions around the world. And I think it is very important. America's always led in that regard. And this is a time when we are, frustrating our allies and trying to embrace our competitors in those authoritarian governments around the world that have been America's enemies, at least when we talk about democracy. So it's a challenging time. And it's also a time that we meet virtually, unfortunately, because of this international pandemic that we are involved with COVID-19, which has been a primary reason why we're seeing an economic crisis that is facing us here in the United States and in many places all around the globe as well. We're also facing a racial justice, injustice, crisis that we've seen taken to the streets in protests and in some cases some riots that have taken place in that regard. We've seen a major friction that is starting to occur relative to race and And you combine that with the economy and people that are the inequality that has been heightened throughout the last several years. And you put that all on the backdrop of an international crisis that we're facing, climate change. So all of these major issues have come together at the same time. So in terms of engaging the voter to get out and vote, boy, there's a lot of reasons to do that this year, to come out and vote and to have your voice heard. And to do so, it's so important to be educated about the issues. I don't know about all of you, but I remain frustrated when I see interviews on CNN or Fox or people that are stopping the average person on the street and asking them questions about COVID-19, for example. And I just shake my head about the lack of knowledge about how serious this crisis is, about the lack of knowledge or belief in science, whether it's COVID-19 or whether we look at climate change, and the lack of respect that we're starting to see come about because it has been fueled, in my opinion, by the leader of our country that is essentially given permission for people to hate. It is an extraordinary time that we are all facing. So I urge everyone to become engaged, really become engaged to the extent that you are participating and educating your colleagues and certainly the student body about what is taking place and how they can become engaged and become involved in their society. Democracy is so precious, but it is very fragile. When we start to see the United States of America with a leader where the United States Attorney General is almost acting like his personal attorney instead of someone that is acting on behalf of the country. When federal officials take an oath of office to protect the Constitution of the United States, and yet they're doing everything they can to get around constitutional principles that place our democracy at risk. It is frightening. And as we have this forum today, there's a hearing going on for the next appointment to the United States Supreme Court. I want to conclude my remarks by saying this to my very liberal friends that are out there. So many of my friends over the years, I can remember going back to the Bush-Gore years, when Al Gore was not perfect enough. And you know that old saying, the perfect is the enemy of the good. So Al Gore wasn't perfect enough. And a lot of people voted for NADA. You saw people who didn't come out to vote, and it was a very close election. Even though he won the popular vote, did not get to serve. Well, there goes a couple of appointments to the Supreme Court of the United States. Hillary Clinton, 2016, not perfect enough. Not perfect enough. And we saw votes going to the Green Party and people staying home, in the Bernie Sanders campaign supporters, many that just didn't participate. And now we see what could potentially be maybe by the end of this week. A total of 3 votes on the Supreme Court. 5 Supreme Court justices. Elections have consequences. And so I would just urge all of us today to take this election so very, very seriously. No matter how you feel, no matter how you want to vote, let's make sure we all participate. Let's make sure that every vote is actually counted, because there will be games that will be played to try to take people's rights away from them. You're not going to see much of it here in Massachusetts, but it is so critically important that we do what we can to help those that are out there protecting the right to vote in places, you know, like Georgia, in Texas, and in many of the swing vote states, where you'll see lines that will last for hours and hours and hours to go cast your ballot. That's all designed to prevent people from voting. That happens in many other countries, but you wouldn't think it would be happening here to the extent that it is. And it is because it's been given permission to happen. So we've got a lot of work to do as we move forward to protect our democracy, to engage our citizenship. And a lot of that happens at university campuses all across America. And that's why I'm so pleased you're doing what you're doing, Jabbar, and everybody is participating. So I thank you all for your leadership and the faculty here. And I thank all those in the student body that are listening and tuning in today. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mark Pacheco, for this thoughtful remarks. And indeed, we live in a special time, and November 3rd is very important. And I would invite Dr. Michael Krizanik to hopefully build on these introductions. And everybody knows Dr. Michael Krizanik, at least by his wonderful book, which I encourage all of you to read, 25 Questions About U.S. Foreign Policy. Dr. Krizanik has contributed to the campus a lot. Also, he mentored me, and I thank him for that. And so, Dr. Krizanik, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Dr.
And by the way, before you speak, if you have any questions, I'm sorry to interrupt, please put it in your chat. You can have it to all speakers or specific speakers, and my friend Laura Mulvey will monitor that and will ask your question or ask you to ask your questions. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Dr. Krizanik.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Jabbar, and I'm happy to see so many people participating in this webinar, and also my colleagues as well. Although the times we live in are certainly very, very disturbing, with all of the very, very dangerous situations that Senator Pacheco and Dr. Jabbar mentioned, from the pandemic to the economy, to climate change, and racist and white supremacist activity. It's important to remember that people in the United States right now are voting and are taking this responsibility very, very seriously, and waiting in line for hours. I think Senator Pacheco mentioned that. If you look at some of the news reports, people are in line for 4 or 5 hours, social distancing, wearing their masks, and are recognizing the fact that voting is a powerful tool in our democracy. And despite the voter suppression that is out there, which is closing voting centers and making it difficult for people to move around in the city or in a county, or the situation in Texas where only one ballot box is available per county. Even in one of the largest cities, Houston, one ballot box. Despite those efforts, people are out there and using the power of the vote to make their decisions on who should lead this country starting on January 20th, 2021. And so I'm encouraged by that. I'm also encouraged by the fact that Bridgewater State University, through the efforts of Drs. Maley and Mary Grant and Laura and many others. In fact, Laura might want to put up the website there of Bridgewater State votes that everyone should be aware of and see all the various different opportunities that people have on campus. Not only this webinar here, but many others between now and the 3rd of November and beyond to get a better understanding of the issues, to get a better understanding of the candidates, to get a better understanding of the general situation we are conducting this election in. I'm also impressed by the increasing involvement of young people, millennials, if you want to use that term, who are actively engaged, organizing, volunteering, participating in many different events across this country, and certainly at Bridgewater State University. I don't want to use a cliche, but the young people, whether at Bridgewater or around the country, are the future of this nation. And this election is really not just only about people who are retired like myself or others, but the future is indeed these individual young people who are going to have to face a very, very changing world as a result of some of the very serious issues that we that we face. The other point I wanted to mention is that the United States does not exist in a vacuum. The world is watching this election, and the world is, I think, the world leaders, whether it is in Europe or China, and we'll get to Russia in a second, are concerned about what the outcome of this election will be and what that will mean in terms of the relationship of the United States to industrialized countries, to countries of less development, countries that have authoritarian leaders, countries who are our adversaries. Unfortunately, the word pity has been used often in the last couple of weeks, that many world leaders, particularly in Europe and the industrial world, are filled with pity over how the United States seems to be unable to find the proper direction, unable to be led in a way that brings confidence to the American people and to the world. And hopefully this election, and we don't know where it's headed, hopefully this election will allow the United States to correct itself, find its way in the world, and develop a leadership group that is one that remakes the United States in a way that I think returns us to the position that was the case under past administrations, whether they're Democratic or Republican. I also want to comment a little bit about the public opinion polls that are out there, and we'll probably discuss this even more through Shaheen and Jason and others. Right now, if you read the polls and believe the polls, Joe Biden is significantly in the lead in most places across the country in general, and in the so-called battleground states. A lot of people are concerned that those polls are not reflective of where the campaign is and where the election may be headed. We just don't know. Those of you who remember 2016 will know that there was many people who predicted that Hillary Clinton had it all wrapped up, and 4 years later we know that that's not the case. But it's important for us to be students of public opinion polling and the accuracy of the polling and the impact that might have in terms of the ability of the American people to go out and vote. As one example, if people see Joe Biden as ahead, why show up? Because he's going to win. That kind of attitude, I think, is one that is filled with a great fallacy. I think Senator Pacheco mentioned the fact that Not everybody showed up to vote in 2016. And this is why, again, the argument that is made, voting is important, voting is a power, voting must be conducted no matter what the circumstances is, even if it means standing in line for 4 hours or ensuring that your ballot is in on time by mail. Lastly, I want to emphasize the fact that the voting in the United States is not done in a vacuum. There is sufficient evidence from 2016 and even now through our intelligence sources that the Russians are actively involved in trying to sway the election towards Donald Trump. There are many examples of how they engage in this through websites, through Facebook, through Instagram, through other social media platforms, and provide a program of disinformation. It is important that all of us pay attention to what they see on the internet. Don't take anything for granted. I would say that from my generation, we used to sit in front of the television and watch the CBS News because we trusted Walter Cronkite, as an example, and we trusted our news sources, whether it's the Boston Globe or the New York Times or the Washington Post or whatever it might be. These days, many people do not trust those sources. They see them as biased, and yet too many people go to websites and other internet sites that are filled with misinformation, filled with lies, and filled with exaggerations. So it's important for all of us not only to vote, but to vote intelligently and to study the issues and to study the differences between the two candidates. And then cast the ballot based on that kind of reasoned, intelligent examination of the issues. And with it, I think the outcome will be such that I think people will feel that they had given it their best shot at having their vote count and having their vote have an influence on the future of this country. So again, I'm hopeful when I see people standing in line for hours. I'm hopeful of the fact that young people are participating more actively. I'm hopeful over the fact that we seem to be recognizing the importance of understanding the issues and the differences between the candidates as we cast our vote. And so I'll leave it at that. Dr. Jabbar, I'll leave it back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Michael Krizanik, for your thoughts. Indeed, we need to be information literate and also media literate, and we just not accept anything and take it for granted. We have to critique it, analyze it, and also go for different sources to verify the information. Our involvement is very important in this case. And I want to just remind ourselves, again, thanks to our co-sponsor, the Martin Richard Institute for Social Justice, the American Institute for Global Engagement, Department of Communication Studies, and the Students Organization, Jewish Muslim Coalitions. With that, I would like to invite our third speaker, Dr. Shaheen Muzaffar, who also, I don't think he's retired, but he wants to be retired and he doesn't like to drive the long distance. But his contribution also is well known, not just in Bridgewater State or around the United States, but really around the world. And I know he has a special collaboration with so many state agents, including the Navy. Dr. Shaheen Muzaffar, please, the floor is yours, and you can actually share your slides with us.
Okay. Hello, everyone. It's good to see everybody. Yes, while I'm retired, the only thing is that I don't like driving. That's the only thing I don't miss. I miss talking to everybody on campus. I have a couple let me begin where Mike and Senator Pacheco left off. And I should tell you, this is a bit of a weird thing for me to talk about because of my professional experience. Besides teaching, some of you may know I do a lot of consulting and a lot of overseas work. And most of the work that I've done in the last 30 years has been in autocratic regimes and how to promote democracy. And I worked for the United Nations and for the US government. So for someone like me and some of my colleagues who do this work, this is a very strange situation because we never thought we would be in a situation to talk about these things about the United States. So let me give you with 2 examples about voting. And my first personal example comes from when I was part of the only American member of an international team in Iraq during the 2005 elections. And we were monitoring in one of the constituencies, and we heard a bomb blast, and we found out that in the next block over, there was a polling going on, and people had lined up, over 500-600 people, an hour before the polling booth opened. And one of the bombs, one of the bad guys threw a bomb at the end of the line, and a couple of people got injured. The ambulance came. People in line picked up the 2 injured people, put them in the ambulance, and the ambulance drove away. The manager of the polling station got frightened and wanted to close the station. Well, the voters told him, "You're a dead man if you do that." And everybody got back in line and voted. Let me give you another example, which I've seen. Women coming out with 2 or 3 kids on their laps, on their shoulders, standing for hours in the hot sun, sometimes bleeding on their feet on paddy fields, dry paddy fields. And people ask them, "Why are you voting?" "It's my right." And that's all we heard. Now, I want to use that as an example to make the point. I think it was Benjamin Franklin would say that eternal vigilance is the cost of liberty. And one thing that I've learned over the years is dictators underestimate the public. You can do a lot of things to people, but don't mess when it comes to voting. And that's what we are witnessing here. There was an interview yesterday, a woman waited for 12 hours to vote. So it is quite encouraging that American people have finally come to realize that our democracy is a precious commodity. So I want to begin with that. And I want to throw up some slides to show you exactly how things are progressing without getting too excited or optimistic about this. And I will end with some rather hard-nosed, pragmatic points that may oftentimes, and for those of you who know me, will know that I don't, political correctness and I don't get along very well. And I will end up with some rather hard-nosed, pragmatic comments about going forward. And my comment will be centered on one single point. If there is a crisis in the country, it is a crisis of governance. How do we make the government work to make some really hard choices? And that's where I will end, because ultimately that is where this election will end up, especially if Mr. Biden and the Democrats take control of the White House. That will be the beginning of the challenge and not the end of the challenge. So let me begin, so where we are, and I will want to share some slides with you folks. Can everybody see this slide? Okay.
Good.
Right. So that's what I call a back to the future. So I want to begin here. This is the 2016 Electoral College results. There are 10 states where I think we need to keep tabs on. But before I go there, I want to show you what happened in 2018 midterm elections. If you look at the blue states, that's where the Democrats electorally wiped out the Republicans. This is quite an important change we need to keep in mind. Because take a look at how these blue states are spread across the country. Northeast is what we would expect, but take a look at what happened here in the central part of the state. Take a look at over here in the Southeast, and take a look at here with the Southwest. This is where Trump won, and this is where the Republicans lost. This is an important commentary. It's what's going to happen in Congress after 2021, and that will be the challenge. From there, I want to move to this. Without getting too optimistic, these are 10 bellwether states and bellwether counties over here. And you should read David Wasserman's Cook report, an excellent report. This, can everybody see this? Just raise your hand if you can. Okay. This is where the election, we have a pretty good data now, and the modeling is quite nice. These are the places where elections will be decided. If you take a look at this, these are the 10 states. Leave us out Indiana, for example. Mr. Trump barely made 10%, starting with Pennsylvania, Michigan, less than 1%, Wisconsin, Florida. These are the states, battleground states. And this is where you see Mr. Biden was in Ohio yesterday, and I will talk a little bit about Ohio, my home state. And for all the criticism that Hillary Clinton received, she lost by 80,000 votes. Let's not forget that. We know what the constituencies were, and that cost her the Electoral College. There were reasons why that happened. But what I want to point out is take a look at these 10 counties. These are bellwether counties. And I put Wood County in Ohio because I grew up in that county. This is south of Toledo. Mike will remember that. Remember Delbert Latta, Mike? That's his home district during the Nixon impeachment, right? I remember Delbert Latta. His son, I believe, is representing that. Bowling Green State University is smack bang in this. This is one of the 10 counties. Now take a look at how the counties are shaping up right now. Only one county, which is the single most bellwether county, is Vigo in Indiana, where Terre Haute is. That is the only county where Mr. Trump has anywhere from 10 to 15-point lead. If you take a look at these counties, Biden is up in every single county, and all the other counties is toss-up. The reason why this is important is Mr. Trump is the incumbent. This should not hold up. This should not happen. So as a result, if you just take a look at this data, and again, like I said, we have a lot of good modeling, and if people want to talk about 2016 polls that Mike said, I'll be happy to explain what exactly happened and how polling has been corrected for that, without again getting too optimistic. So this is Mr. Trump's problems. And if trends continue, dare I say it, we are looking at Mr. Biden winning somewhere in the neighborhood of 320, 330 electoral votes. And there is very good possibility that the Democrats will take the Senate right now. Colorado is gone. Arizona is gone. Good chance North Carolina will go, Tom Tillis. Montana may go blue. If you add those up, you're looking at Democrats winning approximately 54 to 55 seats in the Senate. So if you are a Biden supporter, all of this are pretty good news. But now let me be more pragmatic of how do we understand this. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use my conventional iceberg model of understanding American elections. And there, what I would like to show you is that we see that election at the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole bunch of other things that goes on below the iceberg, which is in this blue thing, the orange box, and these kinds of things. And I'll show you how to understand what's going on. This, I would argue, is how we need to think about the future of the country. And I'll show you this. This is what political scientists talk about, the funnel of causality. You have the results, but you will notice voting don't produce the results. It goes through the Electoral College. But all of these things matter. The one I'm putting my cursor on, these are the short-term immediate impact of the election campaign. Clearly, COVID and economic slowdown are driving this election campaign. And already 10, 15 million people are voting, and we know exactly what is happening where. And these are the red things that you see is what I'm going to be talking about a little bit in a minute. So COVID and economic slowdown is fine, we know that. I want to talk a little bit about negative partisanship. This is a medium term, and then, and what is the future of the country is the three things on social demographic change, income equality, and globalization. So if you add them up together, so this is what I want to talk about. What we have seen in the last 10 to 15 years is the growth of something we have not seen in American politics called negative partisanship. And what negative partisanship means, normally, if you understand negative partisanship, you need to understand what positive partisanship is. Positive partisanship, I vote for candidate A because I like candidate A. Negative partisanship is I'm voting for candidate A because I do not like candidate B. And in the last 2 or 3 election cycle, and particularly in the 2016 election, large numbers of people voted for Donald Trump because they did not like Hillary Clinton. This is a new phenomenon in American electoral behavior, that negative partisanship has been the key. And all the efforts made by political parties to convert people to their side of their position is not going to work, especially in this election, that partisanship is basically baked. And you'll see the vanishing independents. They're not all that independents left, and I'll talk a little bit about independents are not as smart as everybody thinks they are. They're independents because they are ignorant about politics and they're alienated. So they have become kind of a wasted group, and they were very small in this case. So that's what's also driving this election, the whole logic of negative partisanship. And this is a new phenomenon. Alan Abramovich is the one who actually created this model. Let me now focus on this thing. If there is a single 2 or 3 items I want to talk about what's happening in the United States that I think is the key to through the future, particularly public policy. Social demography, by that I mean in the changing demographic character. United States is going through, which no country has gone through, except one other I'll talk about. For the first time, the culturally and racially dominant group in the United States is about to become a minority. And that is the white. And I want to caution, I'll talk a little bit about that, why that's not particularly helpful. But since everybody talks about it, non-white minority groups are about to become a majority in the United States in about 20 years. This is a demographic nightmare for all the people who are voting for Donald Trump, much of whom are in the Midwest. I know that area very well, especially if you take from Western Pennsylvania all the way to Ohio to Wisconsin to Michigan. You're looking at about 10 to 12, 15 million people. And the reason why that is important has to do with the next item about income inequality and globalization. Globalization has simply collapsed the middle part of the country and the demographics. You have these people who no longer have jobs. And the reason why this is important, that this is the industrial heartland of America. And Mr. Trump is simply wrong about this, that we were great. And this is the part of the country which made America great. I have some personal experience with that because I used to work in some of these factories with people. This is the old New Deal Democrats who came out in huge numbers to vote with just about every single Democratic candidate. Their world is gone. And most of them will never, ever get a job that will give them the life they had before. That's why they're angry. Many of them have joined the militias, and you can, I saw a nice map of where the opioid crisis is, and you'll see the opioid crisis overlaid in this area. And what we're also witnessing, unfortunately, is the disproportionate large number of white folks committing suicide in the middle part of the country. This is a very serious issue that our governments have not addressed, neither the Democrats or the Republicans. Obama tried to address it, but because of Republican opposition, failed. Let me give you one example. There was only one candidate in 2016 had a full-fledged policy proposal on the website of how to do job retraining, and that was Hillary Clinton. Huge amount of investment needs to be made by the government on job retraining. Globalization is having that impact. What we are also witnessing, which we have never witnessed in the United States in the last 50, 60 years, is income inequality. The reason why income inequality is so important is because our economy is actually doing very well. We have one of the highest productivity rate in the world. But globalization has caused that. The only problem is globalization moves to technology. and technology leads to more unemployment. So much of the income has gone to the top level, including people who work in Massachusetts. We have been very lucky because of the infrastructure we have, because of our colleges and universities. But if you go to the Midwest and you go to other parts of the country, they are suffering. But let me now tell you the positive side of this. Take a look at Texas, take a look at Colorado, take a look at Georgia, take a look at North Carolina. Texas, of all places, in another 2 election cycle is going to go blue. There's a very strong possibility. There are pockets of blue in Texas, in Colorado, in North Carolina, in Georgia. Why? Because of globalization. The irony for Texas is the economic policy promoted by the Republican governors have helped modernization in Texas. And as a result, you got an emerging middle class, a lot of them immigrant groups, especially Houston. So you get this tremendous amount of combination of social demographic change, income equality, and globalization coming together, coming to a head. And you have a situation in the United States where our institutions so far have been incapable of handling this challenge. And one consequences of this challenge was Mr. Trump's victory. People voted because they were angry, and people voted for Mr. Trump because they did not like Hillary Clinton. That leads me to my last point on challenge of governance. We need to think about Mr. Biden as a transition president, and he knows it too. The challenge for the American government will be, and this is the key to governance, will there be a new policy coalition? One hopes, given the nature of American governing institutions, a new coalition will emerge. It'll not be as tight. It'll be a loose policy coalition according to a range of specific issues, like Senator Pacheco said, say, for example, climate change, job training, school education, college education, across a wide range of issues. The problem will be, and here is my politically incorrect point, progressives are going to be quite disappointed about this. And I have history in support of my position. Think about all the progressive policies that you and I as Americans, and particularly for those of us who live our own blue state bubble, have become very excited about, have supported. Civil rights, women's movement, all of those things. They were not passed by progressive presidents. Let's not forget that Lyndon Johnson was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, and he promoted civil rights, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. And the reason why that's the case is because the nature of the American government. You will notice in this that voting does not lead to policy outcomes. Voting policy outcomes happens here. And any kind of ideological purity, and here Senator Pacheco is absolutely right. We are not looking for perfect candidates. We are looking for candidates who can get the job done. And politicians who can get the job done may not necessarily be, may not be perfect candidates. And my punchline is that if you're looking for policy that is desirable instead of feasible, you will go to your grave a very miserable human being, because this is not how real politics works. This is not how American institutions are set up to work. These institutions have been the key to our success and stability, but they make haste very slowly. You don't have to take my word for it. This is James Madison talking, and he is my hero. I have a bromance with James Madison. He created this system. And you're going to see this kind of challenge and fight over policy if and when Mr. Biden wins. That will be the challenge. And with that, I want to thank you for your time, and I will shut up.
No. Thank you, Dr. Shaheen Muzaffar, for this presentation. And we gave us a lot of ideas and thoughts to discuss and to think about. And at this point, I would like to invite Dr. Jason Edwards. He's Professor of Communication, and he is the chairperson of the Department of Communication Studies. And again, his contribution also to this kind of discussion is really very valuable. Dr. Jason Edwards.
Well, thank you, Jabbar, for inviting me to do this. And it's good to see my colleagues again, and all of you for participating in this. I will try to make this as brief as possible because I'm sure you have a lot of questions and we are running closer to our time and so forth. Just a couple things I want to highlight. I tend to believe that American politics, like a lot of things, is like a pendulum. Kind of goes back and forth. If you look at history, I really am into the American political development and a lot of the published work that I've done. But one of the things that I always tell my students, and I got this idea really from a book that I've been using in my argumentation class called 13 American Arguments by Howard Feynman. And that idea that America is a constant argument. If you think about the preamble of the Constitution, in order to form a more perfect union, the idea that we are constantly evolving and there's nothing that that pendulum swings back and forth. And of course, we're at our current, in our current election, we're at another argument about where we go in the future. This argument will come up again, comes up every 4 years. It comes up every generation, depending on where we're going. So when people are looking at national politics, especially for a lot of the students and a lot of our colleagues here, hopefully you'll think of American politics really as a constant argument. And an argument, argumentation in our parlance today has really got this kind of negative conception, that to argue is to really to fight with each other. That's not what true argumentation is. True argumentation is meeting at a specific kind of level where you both have kind of different positions and you argue on kind of some kind of common ground, or some kind of where you're going to kind of meet in the middle. So the classic issue that I like to think of where you don't have that kind of common ground is like the issue of abortion. If you're someone who's pro-choice or pro-life, they're arguing a lot of times past each other because they're not necessarily arguing on those kind of same grounds. Now, of course, there are all kinds of issues that we have constant arguments about in our nation, regarding war, regarding immigration, regarding U.S. dollar, regarding trade. There's all kinds of things that is a constant argument. And your vote in this election is about where you think this argument should go. If you are someone who is for Donald Trump, whether you know it or not, your argument has a long lineage in American history with regard to, not liking free trade or retrenching in terms of American foreign policy. If you're on the other side, Joe Biden, then you want that argument to go into a different direction. So I get a little salty when people say that this is something that and I'm not saying anybody here, of course, when some of my students, well, this is brand new, we've never seen this before. I'm like, yeah, we have. We've seen it for the last 220 years. It just isn't done in different kind of manifestations, right? And so that's what that kind of brings me to this next point that, I guess I'm much more optimistic, at least I try to be outwardly, with regard to how I see the United States and the world, because I've seen this movie before. I remember my very first publication was on a Russian politician by the name of Vladimir Zhirinovsky. And Vladimir Zhirinovsky came out of the collapse of the Soviet Union, 1993. His Liberal Democratic Party in Russia won a plurality of votes in the Russian Duma, and everyone was calling him the next Hitler. And then we were going to go down this dark path, and there was going to be this new World War III and all this other kind of stuff. And there was like a 3 to 4 year period in Central and Eastern Europe. If you think about the Yugoslav war that started, the civil war that started in 1991 and ended in about 1996. You think about the unfortunate conflicts that continued in Serbia, Kosovo, and Bosnia. You think about the different kinds of conflicts that we're dealing with. You had that same kind of authoritarian environment coming forward. And one of the things that I think was, I just was talking with some folks, friends of mine in Europe now, and it seems that the right-wing hold, or that that movement toward more authoritarianism, at least is waning in different parts of Europe. It's starting to kind of dissipate. That doesn't mean it's still not a danger here or other places, but this idea that it's taking hold all across the world, I think is a mythology that, it makes good headlines, but it's not necessarily what's going on, what we're seeing on the ground. And I think you see that with a lot of the early voting that's going on, that you have a lot of pushback with that notion. You know, and one of the things that's most important to me, as my colleagues in political science and communication will know, is that my work focuses primarily on American foreign policy, particularly as it pertains to, you know, kind of post-World War II policy. And this idea of the liberal international order has really come under attack, I think, over the last 4 years, and this kind of devolution from our engagement in the world. But I think that, again, that is not something that's unusual in American foreign policy. If you take a look at, there's always been a strain from the very beginning where we've had a reluctance to get involved abroad, or we had a reluctance to get involved and assert that leadership position. In fact, that leadership position is really a post-World War II attitude. And Donald Trump is just a manifestation, because he wants to kind of more retrench from that liberal national order, is really a manifestation that's been a part of American politics for the longest time. So what I'm saying is that whenever you see a lot of the arguments that are made on both sides, is you have to take a little bit of perspective about where we've been and where we're going. That a lot of these arguments that are made are really things that we've seen in our past. They've just done with, and they've just amplified it in a different kind of way. Social media, of course, amplifies those kinds of things. But the arguments that people are making about democracy and, you know, conservative, liberal, whatever it might be, are certainly have long strains and long histories that we can trace really back to the early parts of the American Republic. So that's why I want to encourage all of you to think about that notion of an argument as you're thinking about your voting. What side of that argument are you on? And if you don't know what specifically argument you're into, and you could have multiple arguments, right? There are multiple arguments involved in American history. Hopefully you'll take the time to think about, and I think Howard Feynman's book, The 13 American Arguments, is actually a fabulous book to start with, because it really gives you a really good basic grounding of what those arguments have been, and helping you kind of frame how you see where we are currently. And just the final thing that I want to bring up, and this is more about information literacy and so forth, and Shaheen and Mike and Senator Pacheco were bringing up some really, really excellent points. You know, I think there's some, for those of you who are really want to go down the rabbit hole and pay attention to this, because like myself, I will spend hours on Twitter and other places, you know, really delving into this, to, you know, things to look for. I would point out a couple of different places. One, for example, Shaheen was talking about negative partisanship. Perhaps the best authority on negative partisanship right now is a woman by the name of Rachel Bytkofer, who's done some really fabulous work. She's got a brand new website called The Cycle. You can follow her on Twitter. She's Rachel the Doc Bytkofer. But she's got a really, really interesting website on what she's tracking. I would encourage you to go there. I would encourage you to look at the U.S. Elections Project, a website run by Michael McDonald. What a great and or unfortunate name, depending on if you're part of the Doobie Brothers. For those of you who don't get that, look it up on YouTube. Anyway, but the idea is that this website really has been tracking early voting. I just checked it before we got involved here. We have now 11.5 million people who have already voted. And I tell you, that actually is a very low count. I guarantee you it will probably go up to 12 to 12.5 million by the end of the day, because we don't have California. We don't have a number of states that haven't reported, and these are fairly big states. So we're looking at 12.5 million people. To give you some perspective, 4 years ago, around the same time, with the amount of time going to the election, you had 1.4 million people in terms of the early vote. Plus, you have early voting going on in Texas that started today, Georgia, which was yesterday. And just to add a personal anecdote, a friend of mine stood in line for 9.5 hours to vote. She was in the Gwinnett County, Lawrenceville. That seems to be the biggest problem in Georgia. And she had people who she knew that were there for 11 hours. I tweeted out a video last night of that. So hopefully that will dissipate. And of course, I think it was Mike who brought up the idea of voter suppression, or maybe Senator Pacheco, which I certainly think that's certainly an example. It should not take 11 hours to vote in American democracy, even in a pandemic. It should not do that. But so those two places, I would also encourage you to go to look this 270 to win there, and you'll find actually a number of different predictions, pollsters, and so forth. And it's a warehouse of information that you could find a whole host of different kinds of things if you're interested in investigating this election. I'm actually quite encouraged for our democracy, the fact that so many people are taking interest. If Donald Trump does win, it will be because he had more enthusiasm. It may be because he has more enthusiastic supporters. And if that is the case, then, you know, that is the way American democracy is. I don't know if that's going to be the case. You know, based upon the current polling and based upon the data that we have, it doesn't seem like that way. But at the same time, my electoral PTSD, I was in Prague 4 years ago, and I was teaching an elections class, and my students were all tweeting at me, "Are you going to come home?" Because I was in Prague and the election had been called and so forth and so forth. But I did come home, of course, and certainly I'm glad I did so. But I think it's important that all of us try to become literate on what is out there and not react and myself included, react to one poll or to react to one thing. And even if Donald Trump wins the election, for those of my liberal friends who are scared and so forth and who don't want him to win, I do not believe, and I do believe that American democracy would suffer at some level, but I do not believe that this would end the republic. I do believe it would weaken it, but I do not believe that it will end the republic. And one of the things that I find fascinating about this is that 100 years ago, for this election, there was another candidate who was calling for the idea of normalcy. His name was Warren Harding. Warren Harding's entire campaign was built upon the idea of normalcy, returning America back to a normal kind of foreign policy, where we weren't involved in the world, a normal environment where we got rid of a lot of our, partisan politics, a world where we wanted to return to this kind of normalcy before World War I. And that's what he promised. And ironically, you're seeing that in terms of Joe Biden, who I do believe is a one-term president. I hope he is not going to be like Warren Harding and die in office. Certainly don't want that to happen, and we don't want that to happen to anyone. But it is fascinating. You know, the older I get, the more I really believe that American politics is a pendulum, and that you can find a lot of the lessons and a lot of the arguments embedded in that history, and that a lot of the things that we talk about are just manifestations for a different time and a different place. We've been having these arguments for 200 years, and as long as this place exists, we're going to continue to have these arguments. We're just going to do it in different kinds of ways. So hopefully all of you will figure out what arguments are most important to you, and you'll act on those arguments in terms of voting and also getting involved in activism as you move forward. So I'm going to stop right there and give us about 20-25 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Jason Edwards, for this really broader perspectives, and also brought us back to the arguments and how arguments should be based on some evidence, and also the way that we persuade first ourselves and then the people that we interact with. I would like to bring Laura, please.
Yeah, so I put in, I know someone had asked specifically for the links that Jason had just mentioned. So I put some of those in the chat. I'm going to put in the third one. But Jason, if there are other links that you suggested, or really any of the panelists and speakers, if there's other links to join there. But if you do have any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat. You also should have the option to unmute yourself. So questions, comments would be great. Angelo, I see a question. To Dr. Shaheen, based on the new trends on demographics that you have mentioned in Texas and Colorado, I would like you to share with us, how do you see the current immigration ban policy relating to that? Is the ban a policy to influence this change in that demographics?
The answer to your immediate question is yes. Every time there is an attempt by the government. It's not the first time the US government has tried to stop immigration. It is to change demographics. But I think I want to mention that a little bit, in large part because it's one of the areas that I'm conducting some work right now. It is broadly defined of politics of identity, not identity politics. We fight over identities. So let me give you some information and data, and some of which leads to rather counterintuitive conclusions, sometimes politically incorrect. I'm participating in the 4-week workshop that Sabrina and Barbara Bond is organizing tomorrow, Decentering Whiteness. So it's part of my research. While we tend to think about in terms of black and white, and it is demographic trends show clearly that what people we call white are going to be in the minority. Having said that, I would be very careful in using racial terms like that, because that assumes that whites are a monolithic homogeneous glob, just like blacks and other racial groups are monolithic homogeneous glob. And I want to caution you folks, all of us, because there is tremendous amount of pluralism and diversity within each group, and particularly immigrants groups. Let me give you my first politically incorrect comment. Immigrant groups coming from third world countries are not the most socially progressive people. Some of the most conservative, let me give you one specific data. If you visualize a map from New Mexico along the border, along the Rio Grande, come all the way down from El Paso and all the way to Northwest Texas, what you will find is that this place is populated by second, third generation Mexican Americans. Many of them are rich farmers. 75% voted for Donald Trump, and they will continue to vote for him because they literally hate illegal immigrants. We need to be very careful about attributing these kinds of socially progressive policies, but ask yourself why. Think about it, folks. They are Catholics, anti-gay, anti-abortion. Most folks from third world countries come with this kind of attitudes. And today, the single largest contribution made to the Republican Party in financial contribution are Arabs. How do we know that? All you have to do is to go to the Federal Election Commission and take where the money is coming from. You'll find zip codes around Dearborn, Michigan. There's a large Arab population in Houston. I'm reading a book called Red State Christians. This is about 12 right-wing fundamentalist Christian churches. One of them is an Arab church in Houston. So we need to be very careful about attributing these kinds of our own ideological preferences to this massive population. Why is this important? Because the political coalitions are going to go in a way that will cut across racial lines, across ethnic lines, and across economic lines. And so the demographic population that is emerging in the United States is far, far more complex than our simple binary kinds of language and conception we use to identify people. And this is going to have political implications. Let me give you my final political implication that I have been talking about for several years. Most of you here don't know me. If the Republican Party could get rid of its image, part myth, part true, of a white, male, racist party, it'll wipe out the Democratic Party on social issues. This is precisely what happened after Mitt Romney lost. The Republican Party had a full-fledged program to go ahead and recruit Hispanics into the party. And that fell apart because the right wing took over the Republican Party, and now they're suffering. So I would, again, my point is to caution us, and this is not only Hispanics. This is Asian American, this is South Asian, this is Latin Americans. And I would be very careful and very caution us to think a little bit more deeply, look at the nuances of where people live and what kind of political and economic interests they come together. Sometimes they cut across racial and ethnic lines. And we have seen this happen time and time and time and again. And with that, I will shut up. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaheen. We do have about 10 more minutes. There was a question during your chat when you held up the book that you referenced. It didn't show up because of your background. So
It's called Red State Christians.
Red State Christians. All right, I'll put that in the chat there.
Yes, I've got a whole bunch of other books. Something called Democracy for Realists by two political scientists. The subtitle is Why Elections Do Not Produce Responsive Government, which is what I talked about in my presentation.
Thank you.
And I apologize for being so rather hard-nosed about these things, but I'm a political scientist.
It's
my job.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, it's excellent. We have two professors from political science department and one from the communication, and then we have the senator. And so, if I may direct this question to the senator, Senator Pacheco, this is actually comes through email. There is a big concern about the higher education and the funding and the defunding and refunding and then campaign. So, and you know, this is a democratic process. What can you tell our audience and also the educator and students in terms of helping actually this issue and make sure that our higher education is not being, you know, sophisticated question. This is simple questions, how we're gonna fund education. And it is very important for families, even in the time of election. And mute.
I wish I had a great answer for you, Shabbat. I can tell you that what is happening now is everybody that cares about not only the funding of higher education in the Commonwealth here, but nationally, and basic services, healthcare, public safety, etc. We're looking to see what the United States Senate does in terms of the relief package that is there and being negotiated between Pelosi and McConnell and the White House to see if there will actually be a bill that is passed so that the resources will come back to the states to try to help us through this cycle. Right now, at the state level here in the Commonwealth, we're looking at anywhere between a $4 to $5 billion deficit in terms of where we are relative to a revenue shortfall. Now, those dollars are significant. We will be able to get through the rest of the fiscal year that we will close out. We had just closed out, but going into 2021 and more importantly into 2022, we're going to have a major challenge on our hands as to how we finance not only public higher education, but public services in general. And that's because of, again, the two major issues. We need the federal government to be a major player in this pandemic and financing elements of this. Housing is crucial today. The governor just announced a new model relative to evictions and protections of landlords in the banking industry. So there are many issues that are facing us. When we look at higher education going forward, the other issue, it goes back to one of the things that was referenced in some of the slides, demographics. The demographics are huge. You will see, I don't believe it's going to happen at Bridgewater, but you will see a lot of higher education institutions that we know about today that will no longer be around in a few years, because we're not going to have the demographics, the number of students to be in seats and paying tuition to finance public higher education. The other thing relative to public higher education in particular is the economy, the economic issue we're talking about, which is so crucial, in particular for the future of our economy. Public higher education is an engine for our economy, especially the new economy that we are embracing as we move forward and have had to embrace because of COVID-19 in terms of technology. So I can tell you in the short term, we need to continue to put pressure on it's mostly the Republicans in the US Senate to get about the business of doing a bill. I just saw something come through on Twitter that McConnell is now saying that he's willing to put a bill up for a vote on this question. This will have a lot to do with what happens over the short term, and I mean the remainder of this year going into next year's budget, the short-term issues that we're dealing with. Now, longer term, we're talking about the underlying issues in the economy. Where will we be, hopefully, in a post-COVID-19 world? And as we look at those demographic issues, which will play significantly in the challenges that we're facing, because not only are we facing lower birth rates, but we also have a senior tsunami coming at the government. So we have significant impacts on financial needs for seniors, long-term care, healthcare, all of those types of issues that will be impacting the budget. So the best thing, the advice I can give everybody is to stay engaged. You are our government. Everybody is part of that, governmental structure, engagement with their local, state, and national leaders, and continuing to educate oneself on these very, very crucial issues that will face us over the next several years. I can tell you that I've only seen one other time like this, and it wasn't really like this because the economy, as Shaheen has said, that the underlying economy is pretty good right now. This was a government-imposed economic cutback because of COVID-19. And for us to be able to have an economy in which we can all work together, we have to pay attention to COVID-19. The virus, is literally killing us. So we need to work through that in order for our economy to continue to be successful. But I can go back to 1990 when we had the base years of years right after Michael Dukakis. It was the Massachusetts miracle years. Everybody will have to Google that. There's some of us that don't have to Google it, but there are others that will have to do some research on it. But those base years of 89 and 90, we had to borrow to our max, cut substantially, and raise taxes to be able to make it through. I hope we don't get to a point where it's that bad, but the prognosis so far without a federal partner is very, very bad. And I liken it to what happened back in 1990. So I would urge our federal partners to play a role and let us all continue to pay attention to what we need to do together to get through this. But I think Bridgewater State University, because of leadership and good financial planning, over the years, and it looks like the enrollments are continuing to stay there are pretty good. But there's a lot of smaller private higher education institutions that we just won't see around in a few years. That will be the case no matter what the financials are. It's because of the demographics in part.
Thank you, Senator. This is a question to Dr. Krizanik and also Dr. Edwards. Was really based on the constitutional right for our citizens to vote, and now we see signs of denying this right by voting suppression based on probably race or social background or political affiliation. What does that mean from a political perspective, and what does this mean from communication and media perspective? Krizanik and then Dr. Edwards. We have probably 3.5 minutes for both.
Oh, go ahead, Jason, go ahead.
Well, I would say that from like a communication perspective, I think that, obviously the idea of voter suppression or the idea of these lawsuits, just to bring up somebody else, if you want to, Laura, if you want to put this in the chat, there's a guy by the name of Mark Elias, who's the Democrat, the national leader on this, who's running a lot of lawsuits and stuff, scored some big wins, but also had some setbacks over the last 24 hours. But in terms of a communication and media perspective, what I think it does is it just continues a narrative of disconnect between, establishment and, those, those people who are disenfranchised, minority groups. The constant debate about whether or not there's systematic racism, which most of us would probably say that is absolutely, it absolutely exists, depending on how you, define systems and so forth. But, I think that's certainly, it exacerbates that idea. It amplifies those kinds of things. When you see those long lines of people, the design is, for some people it gives them resolve, but other people it's why should I line up? And the idea is that they may not participate, at least with regard to voting.
Jabbar, I just want, I know there's just about a minute or so to go, but if we get over this hump, which I believe we will in terms of voter suppression, and see an enormous turnout, and let's just say a likely victory for Joe Biden, he and Kamala Harris and others on his team are going to have an enormous challenge in terms of dealing with the fact that so many presidential norms have been compromised or destroyed or put aside or ignored. And secondly, there is a strong authoritarian strain in this country that represents, I think, that 30 to 40% of the American people who are supporting Donald Trump. So the challenges are not just about voting and getting people to participate and perhaps have a change in government. It's the struggle afterwards to revitalize the process of a true democratic president and to respond to the very, very dangerous authoritarian strain that we have in our country.
One other thing, Jabbar, if I could, just to add, it goes to the communications, piece, and Jason would be the expert on this, not me, but I do want to say that depending upon where we get our information from as an average citizen, has put our government in part in a role where federal leaders just don't want to compromise anymore. There's no effort to try to come to an agreement. You have people that have got all their information from one side or the other side of issues, and the whole idea of compromising is seen as a failure now by a lot of these major markets, which are controlling unfortunately, a lot of the politics. And so I'm interested in what the reaction to that is, because I'm seeing that just from my perspective, just trying to work with federal officials and seeing people try to work on getting something done. We just don't see the outcome of success on that the way we used to.
Bar, can I just mention, and you know this because we were in Ireland together, but Siva Vaidyanathan's book, Anti-Social Media, how Facebook is undermining democracy, is a fabulous tome about this very idea. And it's not just the United States. It's even scarier if you look at places in India and the Philippines, and how social media has become a tool of authoritarian regimes and so forth. Not intentionally, but it is truly frightening how that's played out in various parts of the world. And I would encourage all of you to read that book, because it is, I think, a great primer in what you can do that. And Jabbar and I had the pleasure of listening to a talk he gave at a conference in Dublin, and I was just blown away by it, and I still love that tome. So just
Jason, can you recite the name of that book one more time? It got past me.
Anti-Social Media, how democracy undermines, or how Facebook is undermining democracy.
Awesome. I'll put that in the chat. Thank you.
Yes, Shaheen, the last 30 seconds.
I know we are out of time. A couple of quick things. On Mike's point, the authoritarian tendency. We have always had authoritarian tendencies in the United States. I think there is widespread evidence for that. And a Pew Research just showed some very specific points about that. And you really have 15 to 20% of the American population baked in with authoritarian tendencies, given the choice of democratic institutions and given the choice of authoritarian institutions. 75, 80% of them chose what we would consider to be authoritarian institutions. What the Trump administration, and the Republican Party have done, they have mainstreamed and normalized this kind of attitudes. There's been a long tradition of that, as Jason has said, particularly in the South and particularly in the local areas. And I think we need to be very conscious of that and understand exactly what that means. And that's why education and these kinds of things that you're having is very, very important to understand. And that actually leads into Senator Pacheco's point, is precisely this binary way of argumentation that Jason mentioned. Democracy does not exist in a polarized culture. Democracy happens when groups are willing to compromise. And our American institutions have been designed to force that compromise. And what has happened in the last 10, 15 years, and I got to tell you, the Republican Party has steadily moved towards that. And the voter suppression is simply a symptom of that, because, very quick data, 53 senators represent less than 20% of the American population. And they are the people who are going to be hurt. For them, the demographic change is a nightmare. And their population knows it. With that, thank you very much for this, Jabbar.
No, thank you so much. And thank you for our wonderful speakers, Senator Mark Pacheco, Dr. Michael Krizanik, Dr. Shaheen Muzaffar, Dr. Jason Edwards, and for our patient audience, because we got 5 minutes or 6 minutes over, my apologies. And on behalf of Bridgewater State University, our co-sponsors, and my colleague, Laura Marvin, we thank you for your participation. And I hope you really, if you haven't register please. And then there are some times to make sure that you are available on November 3rd to vote, because this is the only, if you want to win an argument, any argument that Dr. Edwards was speaking of, or the participation that the senator talked about, or also the image, the United image, outside the United States, global speakings, or probably we will defeat ourselves by just watching the polling, and this is not really a very convincing signifier for us. We need to participate. So I invite all of us to participate, engage our neighbors, our friends, our colleagues, and always be helpful. Again, thank you so much. Stay safe, wear your mask, and social distancing, and be well. Thank you so much. And this is Jabbar and Laura saying goodbye.
Thank you so much. Jabbar, we did have a question at the end, just making sure if we could share some of the speakers' contacts. Someone
Yes.
wanted to reach out to Shaheen. So Michael and Mark, I know you're still here, but if that's okay, then we can share it in a follow-up email. I have a list of people who attended today, so we can maybe share the recording and contact information.
Yes, we'll share the recording definitely very fast. Actually, in 2 hours we will get it from Google, and we'll go from there. I'll send it to you, and then we'll share it with everybody on the campus.
Great.
And with the senator and his office. And by the way, Senator, thank you so much for my friend, really, Scott Young. He was so helpful in making this connection.
That's great. I'm glad everything worked out, and it was nice to see my old friend Michael on here again.
Thank you.
And just want to thank you all very much. And yeah, you can share my State House contact information.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Nice to see
Bye.
all of you.
Jabbar, do you need anything from me? I'm going to save the chat because I have all the
Yes,
links.
save the chat. I will send you the link once it's available, because I don't think there is a need for any editing.
No, I don't
You
think.
know, it's really clean. It can.
The
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
You know, you saved my day when you you sent me the email, but it's okay.
I'm sorry. I meant to send it to you and just say like I'm on board with it, and then I realized when you sent the reminder, I was like, oh, I never touched base. So
That's all right. Thank you so much.
you're welcome. It takes a village. So thank you. That was a great event. We got some really, people were sending me messages saying that they enjoyed it and were really happy with it. So
I'm glad to hear that. Thank you so much.
thank you. Have a good one.
Bye. Bye.